Okay, so I really need to talk about this because literally everyone is acting like I'm the villain in this whole situation. And that's just ridiculous. My name is Maya. I'm 31. And apparently I'm some sort of terrible person because I didn't jump at the chance when my boyfriend asked me to marry him. Twice. Like, sorry for actually wanting to be completely certain about the most important choice I'll ever make. But no, according to everybody else, I should have just said yes immediately because I'm over 30 now, and time is running out or whatever nonsense they believe. Look, I've been with Marcus for 5 years, and sure, I care about him deeply, but caring isn't the only thing that matters, right? There's way more that makes a marriage actually work than just emotions. I have this job at a law firm doing administrative work and document filing, nothing fancy, while he works in supply chain management or something like that. He's always been the reliable type, which is fine, but sometimes I think reliable is just code for predictable. Don't misunderstand me, he's kind and everything, but he's also the type of person who checks with me about every little thing, like dinner plans, every single night. He can't just decide something without getting my input first. Initially, I found it considerate, but honestly, sometimes I just wish he'd take initiative and choose something himself. And this isn't just about food either. It's everything. Always asking me where we should go, what we should watch, what would make me comfortable. It's like he needs constant validation from me, which I suppose is nice, but it's also really draining. I mean, sure, I like that my thoughts matter to him, but does he seriously need my permission for every tiny decision? During our whole relationship, I've been the one who constantly needed reassurance about our direction. I'd ask him all the time if things were good, if he imagined a long-term future with me, if he was truly committed. But whenever he'd flip it around and ask me those same questions, I'd get annoyed. Like, why does he need to dissect my every feeling? Can't he just accept that I'm here because I choose to be? I've always needed to feel absolutely certain before making major commitments, and I don't see anything wrong with that approach. Other women might rush into engagements because they're obsessed with having a wedding, or they're scared of being alone, but that's not me. I actually consider the long-term implications and whether we're truly compatible and all the realistic factors that determine success. Between you and me, I've also been doing what I think of as compatibility tests throughout our time together. Like, I'd set up small scenarios to observe how he'd respond, just to confirm he was genuinely as devoted as he said. Nothing extreme, just minor challenges to see if he'd prioritize me over his buddies, or if he'd show some jealousy when other men talked to me. I had to know he'd stand up for us, if things got tough. That's completely reasonable, actually. Every woman deserves to know exactly where she stands. Sometimes I'd withdraw emotionally just a bit to gauge his reaction, and he'd always chase after me with increased attention and dedication. It confirmed that his feelings were real, even though it clearly stressed him out at times. I pay attention to details, too. Like when his text responses take too long, or when he makes arrangements without consulting me first. Not obsessively, just mentally cataloging patterns so I can discuss them when necessary. He has this annoying tendency to brush off my concerns when I mention them, saying I'm reading too much into things, or being overly emotional. But I'm not being emotional. I'm being perceptive. There's a major difference. Our social circle sees us as this ideal couple, and I put effort into maintaining that perception because I don't want everyone knowing our private business. But honestly, there are definitely aspects of him that irritate me. He lacks ambition, he accepts average results too easily, and he doesn't always understand social dynamics the way I need him to. When we're socializing, I sometimes have to steer discussions or smooth over his clumsy moments. It's not that he's awful. He's just not as refined as I want him to be. The other women we know constantly tell me how fortunate I am and what a great guy he is, which honestly irritates me because they only observe the superficial stuff. They don't deal with his shortcomings daily like I do. They don't notice how he forgets to clean up after himself sometimes, or how he can be completely clueless when I'm dropping hints about something I want. But whatever. I smile and act like the content girlfriend, because that's what people expect. Around year 4, I could sense he was getting more focused on our long-term plans. He kept mentioning marriage more frequently, discussing children, even browsing real estate websites and showing me properties he thought I'd appreciate. Instead of excitement, I mainly felt pushed. Like, why did everything need to happen according to his schedule? Why couldn't he just enjoy what we had and let things progress organically? Whenever he'd mention engagement or wedding topics, I'd typically redirect the conversation or give vague answers because I wasn't prepared for those discussions yet. I needed additional time to determine if this was truly what I wanted permanently. But he wouldn't drop it, becoming more transparent with his hints, and I began feeling trapped by his assumptions. So, the first proposal happened at this lakeside park, the exact location where we'd had our first official date 4 years before. He'd been acting strange all week, more anxious than normal, constantly checking his messages and being secretive about his plans. I suspected something was happening, but I stayed quiet because, frankly, I was interested to see what he'd planned. When we arrived at the park that evening, and he started getting emotional about our history there, I basically knew what was about to happen. He dropped to one knee and presented this ring, and my immediate reaction wasn't about our relationship or our potential future. I was thinking about how unoriginal the whole thing was. Like, really, the same park again? He couldn't think of something more unique or memorable. I mean, I get the sentiment, but I've seen proposal videos online that were far more elaborate. When he asked me to be his wife, I experienced this strange mix of pressure and frustration. There he was, cornering me in this semi-public space, expecting me to have this dramatic, emotional reaction, like in romantic comedies. But that's not my personality. I need space to think through important choices, and I don't appreciate being forced into immediate responses. So, I told him what seemed honest in that moment. I want to marry you, but not right now. I selected those exact words deliberately because I wanted to clarify I wasn't dismissing him personally, just the timing. I watched how deeply my answer wounded him, and truthfully, part of me felt guilty about that. But another part of me felt kind of empowered if I'm being totally transparent. Like witnessing how significantly my response impacted him, confirmed how essential I was to his life. It demonstrated that he genuinely needed me, that I held this influence over his emotional state. I realize that sounds awful, but it's honest. After declining, I explained that I wasn't mentally prepared for an engagement and that I required more time. What I didn't share were my actual reasons. First, I wasn't entirely sure he was my best choice. At 28, I felt like I still had opportunities to explore other possibilities. There was this attorney at the firm who seemed more driven and self-assured than Marcus, and I wanted to keep that possibility available just in case. Not that I planned to be unfaithful or anything, but you never know what chances might arise. Second, I wanted Marcus to demonstrate more before I committed. I needed to watch him work harder, earn more income, prove he could support the lifestyle I imagined for myself. The ring was acceptable, but not spectacular, and I wanted to see if he'd elevate his efforts if I made him wait longer. Following the proposal, I observed him dealing with rejection and uncertainty, and I carefully managed his emotional responses. I provided just enough warmth and comfort to prevent him from leaving, but not enough that he felt completely secure. I wanted him to grasp that my affection wasn't automatic, that he needed to continuously earn it. During the following weeks, I leveraged his vulnerability to establish some updated standards in our relationship. Since he wanted to prove his seriousness, I began anticipating more expensive outings, more meaningful gestures, more focus on my preferences and desires. If he was going to demonstrate his dedication, he needed to increase his investment overall. I also started challenging his patience and faithfulness more regularly. I'd be unclear about my schedule sometimes, delay responding to messages, or casually mention other men in conversation just to monitor his reactions. When he'd question my behavior, I'd reverse it and claim he didn't trust me. I clarified that possessiveness and insecurity were unappealing traits that would drive me away. Looking back, I can acknowledge that I liked having this degree of influence over our dynamic. He was perpetually attempting to satisfy me and secure my validation, which felt satisfying. But I was simultaneously annoyed that he wasn't improving in all the areas I expected after the rejection. Like, if you genuinely want to marry someone, shouldn't you be prepared to do absolutely anything to make them feel confident about that commitment? The year between the first and second proposal was what I consider my evaluation period. I needed to truly assess what type of person I was dealing with, and whether he had the strength to handle someone as self-aware as me. I started pushing limits more deliberately, questioning his social plans, and commenting about how genuine partners make their relationships the top priority above all else. When he'd arrange things without asking me first, I'd give him the cold shoulder until he understood to seek my approval. I wasn't being manipulative. I just wanted him to think about my emotions before making choices that impacted our shared time. I'll confess, I did appreciate watching him adjust his patterns to prevent upsetting me. It proved that I was significant to him, and that he was willing to adapt for our relationship. Around this time, I also developed what I referred to as strategic connections with other people, including this man named Derek from my workplace who'd recently gone through a divorce. He was more economically successful than Marcus, and possessed this confidence that came from life experience. We'd meet for coffee occasionally to discuss professional topics, and he'd offer guidance about career growth and general life strategy. I wasn't doing anything wrong, just preserving a friendship with someone who appreciated ambition in ways Marcus didn't. Derek would acknowledge my intelligence and my determination, and he made me feel valued for characteristics that Marcus sometimes overlooked. It was refreshing to have someone notice my capabilities, instead of just accepting me as I was. I never violated any boundaries with Derek, but I valued the recognition and the reminder that other men considered me interesting and appealing. It helped me maintain perspective about what alternatives I could pursue if I chose to. Meanwhile, my expectations for Marcus kept evolving. I wanted him to organize more creative experiences, remember every small preference I mentioned, and repeatedly prove his commitment through significant actions. When he'd disappoint me, I'd emotionally distance myself until he identified what he'd done wrong and compensated for it. I viewed this as educating him about loving me correctly, showing him what I required to feel appreciated and secure. I'd discuss his limitations with my female friends, but always from a caring angle, like I was simply worried about our compatibility. I'd mention how he wasn't quite as motivated as I'd preferred, or how he occasionally missed social signals that seemed clear to me. My friends were understanding and sympathetic, confirming that I deserved someone who truly understood me and could match my intensity. But I always balanced the criticisms with positive observations too, so they wouldn't assume I was just being harsh. As we neared the 1-year anniversary of his first proposal, I noticed Marcus becoming more withdrawn and less eager to accommodate me. He stopped requesting my perspective on every minor decision, and he began scheduling friend time without checking with me beforehand. Initially, this bothered me because it seemed like he was creating distance. But then I considered it might actually indicate growth. Maybe he was finally cultivating some autonomy and confidence. Still, it also made me uneasy because I was comfortable having more sway over his choices. I found myself giving him increased attention and affection during this stretch. Not because my feelings intensified, but because I wanted to ensure he wasn't losing interest in our partnership. I initiated more physical closeness, arranged surprise romantic evenings, and showed more enthusiasm for his work achievements. I needed to keep him invested while I continued sorting through my own conflicted emotions. I could sense another proposal approaching because I'd been suggesting that I felt more prepared for the next phase in our relationship, but deep down, I remained uncertain about everything. I was comfortable with the dynamic we'd established where he was pursuing me while I preserved my freedom and alternatives. I wasn't willing to surrender that advantage by committing to marriage, but I was curious to see if he'd attempt again, and how I'd feel when that moment arrived. The second proposal occurred at the Botanical Conservatory downtown, and I immediately recognized he'd invested considerably more planning into this attempt. Our mutual friends had assisted him, which honestly frustrated me because now other people had expectations about my response. I felt manipulated by all the romantic staging, the elaborate flower arrangements, the fountain, the entire spectacular production he'd orchestrated. It was beautiful, I'll acknowledge that. But it also seemed like he was attempting to emotionally manipulate me with all the theatrics. When he knelt down again, I experienced this combination of power and irritation flooding through me. I was impressed by the dedication he'd shown, but I was also angry that he was forcing me into another pressure situation when I'd specifically told him I needed more time. In that instant, standing there watching him with the ring, I caught myself thinking about Derek and questioning whether I was compromising by remaining with Marcus. Derek had recently mentioned his divorce was finalized and he was open to dating again. He'd made some remarks about how fortunate Marcus was to have me, and I couldn't stop wondering what a relationship with someone who truly valued my qualities from the start would feel like. So when Marcus asked me to marry him again, I answered, "Not just yet." I selected those specific words to maintain his hope while securing additional time to clarify my actual desires. I witnessed how profoundly my response hurt him, and truthfully, there was something inside me that enjoyed the intensity of that moment. I appreciated seeing how much control I possessed over his feelings, how my words could make this adult man's expression collapse with disappointment. It confirmed just how much influence I wielded in our partnership. But I could also detect that this rejection affected him differently than the previous one. He appeared more wounded, more exasperated, like his patience was finally exhausting. Rather than simply accepting my answer like before, he began asking direct questions about what was preventing me from committing, and when I anticipated being ready. His tone had shifted too, less pleading and more demanding, which surprised me. I attempted my standard explanation about wanting to ensure our long-term compatibility, but he wasn't accepting it this time. He persisted with specific questions, asking what precisely I was waiting for, and what circumstances would make me feel prepared. I felt trapped by his interrogation because I couldn't honestly tell him the truth, that I was preserving other options and waiting to see if better opportunities materialized. After I provided my evasive response about needing certainty, I watched him become angry in ways I'd never witnessed before. He told me that after 5 years, if I wasn't certain by this point, what would ever convince me? That struck a nerve because it made me appear indecisive and unreliable, which isn't how I perceive myself at all. I'm simply cautious and analytical about significant life choices. When he declared he wasn't going to continue waiting and that he was finished wasting his time, I began to panic. Not because I couldn't envision existing without him, but because I was about to lose the comfortable arrangement where I controlled everything. I enjoyed having someone so committed to me, someone who centered his entire world around me, and I wasn't prepared to relinquish that. So I deployed my typical strategies, the tears and vulnerability that usually made him relent and comfort me. But this time, he simply stood there observing me cry, without attempting to resolve it, which genuinely alarmed me. I could sense I was losing command of the circumstances, and that frightened me more than the possibility of losing the relationship. In a desperate moment, I told him, "Fine, I'll marry you. Please don't leave." But even as those words emerged, I understood they originated from the wrong motivation. I wasn't agreeing because I wanted marriage. I was agreeing because I wanted to win the confrontation and preserve my control over our dynamic. When he departed anyway, I was absolutely stunned. I'd never witnessed him stand firm like that previously, and I didn't know how to handle a version of Marcus who wouldn't yield to my wishes. The aftermath of Marcus leaving was complete pandemonium, but not for the reasons everyone anticipated. I wasn't heartbroken about losing my soulmate. I was enraged about losing control of everything. My immediate reaction was to blame everyone else for this disaster. Our friends should have counseled him toward reason instead of supporting his ultimatum. His family probably encouraged his decision to abandon me, despite barely knowing me. Other women must have been influencing him with ideas about what he supposedly deserved, convincing him he was superior to someone who simply needed additional time. I was shocked he didn't come back within days like he always did following our arguments. Typically, he was the one who apologized first, who initiated reconciliation between us. I'd grown accustomed to him being the peacemaker in our relationship, and I anticipated him recognizing he was overreacting and returning to resolve things. But days became a week, then 2 weeks, and still silence. That's when I launched my campaign to shape the narrative through our shared friends. I started sharing carefully curated versions of our history that portrayed me as reasonable, and him as impatient and unreasonable. I emphasized how I simply wanted absolute certainty about such a monumental decision, how I required a partner who would honor my timeline and validate my need for security. Most of our female friends completely understood my perspective and sympathized with how pressured I must have felt. I made certain to emphasize how hurt I was that he'd issued an ultimatum rather than being patient with someone he supposedly loved. I portrayed myself as the casualty of his impossible expectations and emotional blackmail. The attention and validation felt satisfying, honestly. People were monitoring my well-being, bringing me meals, affirming my interpretation of the whole situation. I felt like the injured party, and I appreciated having that status. But I was becoming frustrated that certain people, particularly his friends, weren't accepting my narrative. They seemed to believe he'd been exceptionally patient and that I'd had sufficient time to clarify my emotions. Whatever. They were obviously prejudiced in his favor. Anyway, I became fixated on tracking what Marcus was doing and who he was contacting. I monitored his social media obsessively, searching for evidence that he was missing me or regretting his choice. I asked mutual friends casual questions about him, attempting to appear concerned rather than desperate for updates. I even began driving past locations I thought he might visit just to potentially glimpse him and assess his emotional condition. But the information I was receiving wasn't what I wanted to hear. According to our friends, he seemed to be managing fine without me. He wasn't posting melancholy content or appearing depressed like I expected. Instead, he appeared to be concentrating on personal growth, socializing with his friends, even seeming happier according to some observations. This made me absolutely livid. How dare he act like losing me was insignificant? How could he seem improved without me when I'd been the best aspect of his existence for 5 years? I began inserting subtle criticisms about him into conversations with our friend circle. Nothing too transparent, just small remarks about his communication deficiencies, his emotional immaturity, his inability to handle an independent woman who understood her own value. I wanted people to comprehend that perhaps this separation was actually his responsibility, not mine. I needed to control how people interpreted our relationship and ensure they didn't perceive him as some kind of martyr. As the weeks progressed without any communication from him, my anger escalated. I felt like he was being immature and obstinate, penalizing me for being transparent about my emotions. I convinced myself that he was the actual problem, that he obviously couldn't handle being with someone who maintained standards and expectations. If he genuinely loved me, he would have been willing to wait indefinitely for me to feel prepared, but instead he discarded 5 years because he couldn't be patient for a few more months. I started strategizing ways to force interaction with him, including appearing at his workplace or at gatherings I knew he'd attend. I even contemplated sending him a dramatic letter explaining how devastated I was by his abandonment and how he'd completely misunderstood my need for time. I was becoming consumed with proving he still needed me, and that walking away was a mistake he'd eventually recognize. 7 months after Marcus left, the universe decided to completely obliterate my existence in the most excruciating way imaginable. I discovered through social media that he wasn't simply moving forward. He was absolutely flourishing without me. Some woman named Stephanie had begun appearing in his posts, and it was unmistakable they were together. She worked as a physical therapist or something equally perfect and admirable, and from what I could observe, she seemed irritatingly genuine and encouraging. But what truly devastated me wasn't just that he was with someone else. It was how fundamentally different their relationship appeared from ours. In every photograph, they both appeared authentically happy and comfortable. There was no conflict, no challenges, no manipulation. She never posted ambiguous statements about relationships or made indirect passive-aggressive remarks about needing independence. They simply seemed to appreciate each other's presence, without all the complexity I assumed was standard in committed relationships. I devoted hours analyzing their social media exchanges, searching for indicators of problems or incompatibility, but everything appeared disgustingly functional. The crushing revelation came when I learned through our mutual friends that Marcus had proposed to Stephanie after only 9 months together, and she'd accepted immediately. 9 months. 9 months. I'd had 5 years to determine my emotions, and this woman understood after less than a year that she wanted to marry him. The engagement announcement was everywhere on social media, with everyone commenting about how compatible they were, and how Stephanie clearly recognized quality when she encountered it. That final remark felt like a direct criticism of me, like they were implying I'd been too foolish to appreciate what I possessed. When I attempted to make subtle disparaging comments about how premature their engagement was, people began highlighting that I'd had abundant time to value Marcus and declined to do so. My own friends started distancing themselves from me as they realized I was being resentful instead of supportive. They began making observations about how I needed to progress and celebrate his happiness, which only intensified my anger. Couldn't they perceive that this entire scenario was unjust to me? But the absolute worst aspect was discovering that Marcus had received a promotion at work and was purchasing a home with Stephanie. Everything I'd wanted him to demonstrate to me, all the financial stability and ambition I'd demanded, he was now providing for someone else who'd never required him to prove anything. Stephanie never forced him to overcome obstacles or earn her affection through elaborate displays. She simply loved him and constructed a life with him, which apparently was all he'd ever desired. I realized that while I'd been evaluating his devotion and making him compete for my approval, she'd been his equal partner and advocate. While I'd been preserving alternative options and maintaining other connections, she'd been building a future with him. While I'd been analyzing every imperfection and pushing him toward improvement, she'd been accepting him authentically and evolving alongside him. It made me nauseous to comprehend that everything I believed made me an intelligent, cautious woman, actually made me appear like someone who didn't recognize what she had. In my desperation, I made one final attempt to reclaim some influence over the situation. I sent Marcus an extensive message explaining how I was prepared now, how I'd recognized what I'd sacrificed, and how we could reconcile if he was willing to attempt again. I told him that what we shared was genuine and profound in ways his new relationship couldn't replicate, and that Stephanie would never comprehend him like I did. His reply was concise and absolutely devastating. He told me he was content with his existence and wished me well, but he wasn't interested in revisiting the past. He expressed hope that I'd discover what I was searching for, but it wouldn't be with him. The message was courteous but definitive, and I could detect that I no longer possessed any influence over him whatsoever. I'd become completely irrelevant to his happiness and achievement. Here I am currently, sitting in my apartment, scrolling through photographs of their engagement celebration, consumed with fury and envy, but still refusing to acknowledge that any of this is my responsibility. I'm convinced that Marcus was simply impatient and couldn't handle being with a woman who maintained standards. Stephanie obviously settled for the first acceptable man who expressed interest, which reflects more about her desperation than his value. Our friends selected sides based on superficial observations instead of understanding the genuine complexities of our relationship. Society pressures women to commit quickly instead of taking time to make intelligent choices about their futures. Everyone disappointed me in this situation, but I'm the one who must endure the consequences of their failures. I avoided disaster anyway, because if Marcus couldn't wait for me to be ready, he obviously wasn't the correct person for me initially.